The mountain road hadn't been paved in decades. Cracks ran through the asphalt like old scars that never quite healed, and weeds pushed up through the gaps with stubborn determination. James Carter gripped the steering wheel of his rusted Ford pickup, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the winding path ahead. Snow had started falling an hour ago, light at first, now coming down in thick curtains that made the world beyond his windshield look like a faded photograph. Beside him, Atlas sat perfectly still in the passenger seat. The Belgian Malinois had his ears pricked forward, amber eyes tracking every shadow, every movement in the trees. A long scar ran down the left side of his face, cutting through fur that had never quite grown back properly. That scar told a story James tried not to think about. The explosion, the screaming, the way Atlas had dragged him behind cover while bullets tore up the sand around them. James swallowed hard and forced his attention back to the road. The GPS had stopped working 20 minutes ago. Not that it mattered. He remembered this route. Barely. The last time he'd driven it. He'd been 17 years old, angry at the world, convinced his grandfather didn't understand anything about real life. That was 15 years ago, before the Marines, before Afghanistan, before everything changed. The letter sat folded in his jacket pocket, its edges soft from being opened too many times. He could recite it from memory now. The lawyer's formal language, the notification of his grandfather's death, the reading of the will, the property deed with James's name written in shaky handwriting that looked nothing like the strong, confident script he remembered from birthday cards. Your grandfather left you the house and 40 acres. No debts, no strings, just a request that you come see it before you make any decisions. James hadn't wanted to come. He'd spent the last 6 months after his discharge sleeping in his truck, picking up day labor when he could find it, avoiding questions about where he'd been and what he'd done. The VA appointments he'd missed, the pills he wasn't taking, the nights when sleep felt more dangerous than staying awake. But winter was coming to the Appalachian Mountains, and he had nowhere else to go. Atlas shifted suddenly, a low rumble building in his chest. Easy, James murmured. We're almost there. The trees opened up, and the house appeared like something pulled from memory and nightmare all at once. It sat at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to lean in protectively. 2 stories of weathered wood and stone. A wraparound porch that sagged on one side. Windows dark and watching. It looked smaller than he remembered. Or maybe he was just bigger now. Heavier with things he couldn't put down. James cut the engine. The sudden silence pressed against his ears, broken only by the soft tick of cooling metal and the whisper of snow falling through the trees. He sat there for a long moment, unable to move, chest tight with something he couldn't name. Atlas nudged his hand. Warm. Solid. Real. Yeah, James said quietly. I know. He stepped out into the cold. The air bit at his skin, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke from some distant chimney. His boots crunched through fresh snow as he walked toward the porch, Atlas moving beside him with the precise awareness of a trained soldier who never truly went off duty. The porch steps groaned under James's weight. The same sound they'd made when he was a kid, sneaking out to watch the stars after his grandfather had gone to bed. He reached the front door and found the key exactly where the lawyer's letter said it would be, under the third plank from the left, wrapped in oilcloth to keep it from rusting. His grandfather's handwriting was on a small tag tied to the key. For James. When you're ready. Something cracked open inside his chest. James blinked hard and turned the key in the lock. The door swung open with a low groan, releasing a breath of cold, stale air that smelled like dust and old wood and something else. Something faintly familiar that he couldn't quite place. Inside, the house was dark. James found a light switch and flipped it. Nothing. No power. Of course. The lawyer had mentioned that utilities had been shut off after his grandfather passed. He pulled out his flashlight and swept the beam across the entry. The light caught on familiar shapes. The coat rack where his grandfather always hung his heavy wool jacket. The small table where keys and mail used to pile up. The photograph on the wall of a younger version of his grandfather standing beside a woman James barely remembered. His grandmother, dead before James was born. Atlas entered first, as he always did, nose to the ground, tail stiff and alert. He made a systematic sweep of the front room before returning to James's side with a quiet huff. Clear? James asked. Atlas sat, which meant yes. James stepped inside and closed the door behind them. The house settled around him with the creaks and sighs of old timber adjusting to new weight. He moved through the room slowly, cataloging what remained. The living room with its stone fireplace and faded rug. The kitchen with its ancient stove and sink stained by years of hard water. The dining table where he'd eaten countless meals, listening to his grandfather's stories about the mountains, about the old days, about things that mattered. Everything looked frozen in time, like his grandfather had simply walked out one day and never come back. James found his duffel in the truck and brought it inside. Everything he owned fit in that bag. 2 changes of clothes, a toiletry kit, the discharge papers he tried not to look at, the medication bottles he'd stopped opening weeks ago. He built a fire in the living room fireplace using wood stacked beside the hearth. The flames caught slowly, licking at the kindling before spreading to the larger logs. Warmth began to fill the room, pushing back the cold that had settled into the walls. Atlas lay down near the fire, but didn't relax. His eyes tracked every shadow, every sound. The wind outside, the creak of timber, the soft pop of burning wood. James sat on the old couch and stared into the flames. Memories flickered at the edges of his mind. Summer days exploring the woods, learning to fish in the creek. His grandfather teaching him how to split wood, how to read the sky for coming weather, how to be still and patient when the world felt too loud. The old man had been a Marine too. Korea. He never talked much about it, but sometimes James would catch him staring at nothing, jaw tight, hands clenched. Now James understood what those moments meant. He must have dozed off because he woke with a jerk, heart slamming, hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. The room tilted. Smoke and sand filled his vision. Shouts echoed in languages he didn't understand. The pressure wave of an explosion pushed against his chest. Atlas was there instantly, pressing his head against James's knee, grounding him with weight and warmth and steady breathing. James gasped, forcing air into his lungs. The room came back into focus. Not Afghanistan. Not a firefight. Just an old house in the mountains. Just the wind outside. Just the fire crackling softly in the hearth. "I'm good," James whispered, though his voice shook. "I'm good." Atlas didn't move until James's breathing slowed, until his hands stopped trembling, until the present felt more solid than the past. The fire had burned down to embers. James checked his watch. Nearly midnight. He stood on shaky legs and added more wood to the fire, then made his way upstairs to find somewhere to sleep. The second floor had 3 bedrooms. His grandfather's room at the end of the hall, a guest room that had never seen many guests, and the small room that had been James's during those childhood summers. He pushed open the door to his old room. The bed was still made with the same quilt his grandmother had sewn before she died. A small desk sat beneath the window. Books lined a shelf on the wall, titles he'd read over and over until the pages fell apart. But something felt wrong. Atlas sensed it too. The dog stopped in the doorway, hackles rising, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. James swept his flashlight around the room. Everything looked normal, untouched, exactly as he'd left it. Then Atlas moved to the corner near the closet and began pawing at the floor. "What is it, boy?" Atlas scratched harder, nails scraping against wood. He looked back at James, then at the floor, then barked once. Sharp, urgent. James crossed the room and knelt beside the dog. He ran his hand over the floorboards where Atlas was focused. They looked the same as all the others. Old pine planks, scarred by time and use. But when he pressed down, one board shifted slightly. Just a fraction. Enough to notice if you were looking for it. His pulse quickened. He pulled out his pocket knife and wedged it into the gap between boards. The plank lifted easily, like it had been designed to come up. Beneath it was darkness, and the faint smell of old paper and metal. James aimed his flashlight into the gap. Inside was a metal box. Military issue, by the look of it. Olive drab with rust spots at the corners. A combination lock held it shut. His hands trembled as he lifted the box free. It was heavier than it looked. He set it on the floor and stared at it, heart pounding. Atlas nudged the box with his nose, then looked at James expectantly. "Yeah," James said quietly. "I see it." The combination lock was old but functional. 3 numbers. He tried his birthday. Nothing. His grandfather's birthday. Nothing. The year his grandfather served in Korea. The lock didn't budge. Then a memory surfaced. The last conversation they'd had before James left for the Marines. His grandfather pressing something into his hand. Dog tags. Old ones, worn smooth by time. The service number engraved on those tags. James still had them, buried at the bottom of his duffel. He retrieved them and read the numbers by flashlight. 3 digits stood out. The last 3 of the service number. He spun the combination lock. Click, click, click. The lock popped open. James hesitated, suddenly afraid of what he might find. But Atlas nudged his hand again, and he lifted the lid. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. His grandfather as a young Marine. Men in uniform James didn't recognize. And then others. Recent photographs. Within the last few years. His grandfather standing beside a creek James recognized from childhood. His grandfather with another elderly man. Both of them holding shovels. Both looking serious. Beneath the photographs were documents. Land surveys. Maps of the property. And a letter in his grandfather's handwriting. James, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you found what I hoped you'd find. I'm sorry for the secrecy. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. But some truths are dangerous, and I couldn't risk putting you in harm's way while you were still young. The property you've inherited isn't just 40 acres of mountain land. Beneath it runs one of the purest freshwater springs in the state. I discovered it by accident 30 years ago, and I've been protecting it ever since. There are people who want this water. Developers. Corporations. They've made offers. Then threats. Then worse. Your grandmother didn't die of natural causes, James. Neither did I, if I'm being honest. By the time you read this, they'll have gotten to me somehow. Heart attack, they'll say. Stroke. Something that looks natural enough not to raise questions. Don't trust anyone in town. Not the sheriff. Not the county officials. They've all been bought or scared into silence. There's more I need to tell you, but it's not safe to write down. The truth is hidden where only someone who knows this land would think to look. Follow the creek upstream 1 mile. You'll know the place when you see it. Protect the water, James. It's worth more than money. It's worth everything. Grandpa. James read the letter 3 times, each word settling into his chest like stones. Atlas pressed against his leg, sensing the shift in his breathing, the tension building in his shoulders. His grandfather hadn't died of natural causes. The heart attack the lawyer mentioned. The quick funeral. The sealed casket. All of it suddenly felt wrong. James looked down at Atlas. The dog stared back at him with those steady amber eyes, waiting for orders, ready for whatever came next. Tomorrow, James said quietly, we follow the creek. But as he folded the letter and returned it to the box, a sound came from downstairs. Soft, deliberate, the creak of the front door opening. Atlas was on his feet instantly, body rigid, teeth bared in a silent snarl. James killed his flashlight and moved to the bedroom door, heart slamming against his ribs. He heard footsteps now. Slow, careful. Someone moving through the house like they knew exactly where they were going. The old instincts kicked in without permission. James pressed himself against the wall beside the door, muscles coiled, breathing shallow and controlled. Atlas positioned himself on the other side, ready to strike. The footsteps climbed the stairs. 1 step, 2, 3. Whoever it was didn't bother being quiet anymore. They knew James was here. They'd seen the truck outside, the smoke from the chimney. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. A voice called out. Deep, male, casual in a way that felt calculated. Mr. Carter? James Carter. James didn't answer. I know you're up here. Saw your vehicle. Just want to talk. Nothing official. Atlas's growl deepened, vibrating through the floorboards. That your dog? Sounds like a good one. Military trained, I'd bet. James's jaw tightened. Whoever this was knew things they shouldn't know. The footsteps moved closer, stopping just outside the bedroom door. Name's Dale Pritchard. I'm with Silver Creek Development. We've been working with your grandfather on some property matters. Thought we should continue the conversation now that you're the owner. James stayed silent, counting heartbeats, measuring distance, calculating options. Look, Pritchard continued. I'm not here to cause trouble. Just want to make you a fair offer. More than fair, actually. For the house and the land. Cash deal. You could be out of here by the end of the week with enough money to start fresh somewhere warm. Through the crack in the door, James could see a shadow. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat and boots that looked too expensive for a mountain house call at midnight. Your grandfather was a stubborn man, Pritchard said. Held on to this place longer than he should have. Made things complicated. I'd hate to see you make the same mistake. Atlas's body tensed, muscles bunching, ready to launch. I'll leave my card on the table downstairs, Pritchard said after a long pause. Think about it. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. The footsteps retreated, back down the stairs, across the living room. The front door opened and closed. But James didn't move, didn't breathe, because he'd learned in Afghanistan that the first person to leave isn't always the last person in the room. Atlas remained frozen, still locked on something. Then James heard it. A second set of footsteps. Quieter, moving through the kitchen. He eased the bedroom door open and moved into the hallway. Atlas beside him, both of them silent as shadows. They reached the top of the stairs and looked down. A figure stood in the living room, silhouetted against the dying fire. Smaller than Pritchard, holding something that caught the light. A camera. James descended 3 steps before the fourth one creaked. The figure spun around. A woman, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back. She froze when she saw James, then slowly raised her hands. I'm not with them, she said quickly. I'm a journalist. Sarah Mitchell. I've been investigating Silver Creek development for 6 months. Get out, James said flatly. Your grandfather contacted me 3 weeks before he died. She continued, speaking fast. He said he had proof they were poisoning water sources to force property sales. He was going to give me documents. Then he died, and the documents disappeared. Atlas growled, low and menacing. Sarah kept her hands raised, but didn't back down. They killed him, Mr. Carter. And if you're not careful, you're next. James stared at her, pulse pounding in his ears. Every instinct screamed not to trust her. But the letter in his grandfather's box echoed in his mind. Don't trust anyone in town. This woman wasn't from town, and she'd said things that lined up too perfectly with what his grandfather had written. How did you get in? James asked. Back door. Lock's broken. Has been for years, your grandfather told me. That was true. James remembered his grandfather never bothering to fix it, saying anyone determined enough to break and would find a way regardless. Show me your credentials, James said. Sarah slowly lowered one hand and pulled out a wallet, tossing it to James. He caught it and flipped it open. Press credentials from a regional investigative news outlet. Her photo. Her name. I need 5 minutes, Sarah said. That's all. Then I'll leave, and you can decide if you want my help or not. James looked down at Atlas. The dog had stopped growling but remained tense, watching the woman with unblinking focus. 5 minutes, James said. Then you're gone. Sarah nodded and gestured to the dining table. Mind if we sit? They moved to the table. Sarah pulled out a laptop and opened it. The screen's glow harsh in the darkroom. She turned it so James could see. Silver Creek Development has acquired 47 properties in this region over the last 8 years, she said, pulling up a map with red markers. Every single one had significant water rights. Springs, wells, creek access. She clicked to another file. 3 of those property owners died within 6 months of refusing to sell. All ruled natural causes. Heart attacks, strokes. One fell down his basement stairs. James's chest tightened. Your grandfather was number 4, Sarah continued. He reached out to me after they started making threats. He'd documented everything. Photos, recordings, water tests showing contamination in areas where Silver Creek had been surveying. She pulled up another file. Audio recordings. James recognized his grandfather's voice, talking about men in trucks, strange equipment near the creek, dead fish floating in places where the water had always been clean. He was going to go public, Sarah said. He had everything ready. Then he died, and it all disappeared. The sheriff cleaned out this house the day after the funeral. Said it was standard procedure for an unattended death. Sheriff took evidence. James asked. Took everything that mattered. Or so he thought. James pulled out his grandfather's letter and slid it across the table. He left me this. Sarah read it quickly, eyes widening. He hid it. The real evidence. He hid it somewhere on the property. Follow the creek upstream 1 mile, James quoted. Sarah looked at him. When do we go? We don't, James said. I go. Alone. With respect, Mr. Carter, you've been here 4 hours. I've been investigating this for 6 months. I know who these people are. I know how they operate. You need someone watching your back. I have someone, James said, nodding toward Atlas. Sarah glanced at the dog, then back at James. No offense to your partner, but he can't testify in court. I can. And more importantly, I can make sure whatever you find gets published before they can bury it. James wanted to say no. Every part of him wanted to tell her to leave, to handle this alone, to not let anyone else into the mess his grandfather had left behind. But then he thought about Afghanistan, about the men who died because they tried to do everything alone, about the times Atlas had saved his life simply by being there, watching angles James couldn't see. "You step where I step," James said finally. "You do exactly what I say. And if things go wrong, you run." "Understood." Sarah nodded. "Understood. We leave at first light." She stood and gathered her laptop. "I'll be back at dawn. And Mr. Carter? Lock that back door. Broken or not, at least wedge something against it." After she left, James did exactly that. He pushed a heavy chair against the back door and checked every window. Atlas followed him through the house, alert and watchful. When James finally lay down on the couch near the fire, sleep felt impossible. His mind raced with everything he'd learned. His grandfather murdered. A corporation poisoning water. Evidence hidden somewhere in 40 acres of mountain wilderness. But exhaustion eventually won. His eyes drifted shut, and for once, the nightmares stayed away. When he woke, pale light filtered through the windows. Atlas sat by the door, ears pricked forward. A truck engine rumbled outside. James looked out the window. Sarah's Jeep. Right on time. He grabbed his jacket and the metal box, then paused at the door. His grandfather's rifle hung above the mantel. He'd left it there 15 years ago. Now he took it down, checked the action, and slung it over his shoulder. Atlas watched him, tail straight, ready. "Let's go find out what Grandpa was protecting," James said. They stepped out into the cold morning air, and the mountains waited with secrets that had been buried long enough. The sun hadn't fully cleared the ridge yet, leaving the world painted in shades of blue and gray. Frost clung to everything, making the trees look like they'd been dipped in glass. James's breath clouded in front of his face as he walked towards Sarah's Jeep, Atlas moving beside him with military precision. Sarah stepped out when she saw them approaching. She'd changed into hiking boots and a heavy jacket, and James noticed the backpack slung over her shoulder. Professional gear. She wasn't playing journalist. She'd done this before. "You armed?" James asked. She pulled back her jacket enough to show a pistol holstered at her hip. "Licensed. Trained. And yes, I know how to use it." James nodded. "Good. We're going into terrain that doesn't forgive mistakes. Stay close. Watch your footing. And if I tell you to get down, you don't ask questions." "Copy that," Sarah said, and the military phrasing wasn't lost on James. "You serve?" he asked. "Army. 2 tours. Iraq." Something loosened in James's chest. She understood. That made this easier. Or maybe more complicated. He wasn't sure yet. They started walking toward the tree line behind the house, following a barely visible trail that wound through underbrush and fallen timber. The creek announced itself before they saw it, a constant murmur that grew louder with each step. When they reached the water, James stopped to get his bearings. The creek was narrow here, maybe 10 feet across, running clear over smooth stones that had been worn down by centuries of current. Steam rose faintly where the water moved fastest, a sign that it was fed by underground springs that stayed warmer than the air temperature. Atlas immediately moved to the water's edge and began sniffing along the bank, nose down, working a pattern James had seen dozens of times in Afghanistan when they were sweeping for IEDs or tracking enemy movement. "He's got a scent," Sarah observed quietly. "He's got something," James agreed. Not sure what yet. They followed the creek upstream, moving at a steady pace that ate up distance without burning energy too fast. James kept his eyes moving, scanning the terrain the way he'd been trained, looking for signs of disturbance. Recent tracks. Anything that didn't belong. 20 minutes in, Atlas stopped abruptly. His ears swiveled forward, and a low rumble started in his chest. James raised his fist, and Sarah froze immediately, military training kicking in without thought. They waited, listening. Then James heard it. Voices, distant but clear enough to carry through the cold morning air. Men talking, the clank of metal on metal. He gestured for Sarah to get low, and they moved off the trail into deeper cover. Through the trees ahead, James could make out movement. 3 men in work clothes and orange vests, standing beside surveying equipment. A truck was parked on what looked like an old logging road James hadn't known existed. "Silver Creek," Sarah whispered, pulling out a small camera with a telephoto lens. She began taking photos, the shutter clicking softly. James watched the men work. They were setting up some kind of testing equipment near the creek. One of them walked to the water's edge with a sample bottle, filled it, then returned to a case full of similar bottles. Water testing, James murmured. But for what? Contamination levels, Sarah replied, still photographing. They test before and after. That way they can show the water was already bad when they started developing. Except they're the ones contaminating it. Exactly. One of the men pulled out a radio. James couldn't hear the conversation, but the body language changed. All three men suddenly became more alert, looking around like they'd been told to watch for something. Or someone. "We need to move," James said quietly. "Now." They backed away from their position and continued upstream, moving faster now, putting distance between themselves and the work crew. Atlas stayed focused on the creek, occasionally pausing to mark a scent, then moving forward again with renewed purpose. Half a mile upstream, the terrain changed. The creek widened and deepened, cutting through a small ravine where rock walls rose on either side. The water here ran darker, shadowed by overhanging trees and the angle of the morning sun. Atlas stopped again, but this time he didn't growl. He sat. The signal for found. James moved to where the dog was focused. At first, he didn't see anything unusual, just rock and water and the skeletal remains of winter vegetation. Then his eyes caught it. A gap in the rock wall. Not natural. Too regular. Too deliberate. He moved closer, pushing aside dead branches and old growth. Behind the vegetation was an opening. A cave entrance, maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. Old timbers framed it, rotted with age but still standing. Someone had deliberately concealed this place. "Your grandfather's mine," Sarah said, coming up beside him. "My grandfather didn't mine," James replied. "No, but someone did. 100 years ago, these mountains were full of small operations. Most of them played out and got abandoned." James pulled out his flashlight and aimed it into the darkness. The beam caught on rough walls and a floor that sloped downward, deeper than he could see from the entrance. "We're going in," he said. Sarah pulled out her own light. "Lead the way." They had to crouch to enter, moving carefully over loose rock and exposed roots. The air inside was cold and damp, carrying the mineral smell of deep earth and standing water. 20 feet in, the passage opened into a larger chamber where they could stand upright. James swept his light around the space and stopped breathing. The chamber wasn't empty. Metal shelving lined one wall, stacked with plastic containers, each one labeled with dates, locations, and what looked like test results. Dozens of them. Years' worth of documentation. On a makeshift table sat a laptop in a waterproof case, connected to a battery pack. Beside it were notebooks filled with his grandfather's handwriting. Maps of the property. Photos of men James didn't recognize standing beside Silver Creek development trucks. And in the corner, sealed in waterproof tubes, were documents. Legal files. Water rights. Test results showing contamination. And communications. Emails between Silver Creek executives and county officials, discussing payoffs and timeline for acquiring properties. "Holy shit," Sarah whispered. "This is everything. This is enough to bring down the entire operation." James moved to the table and opened one of the notebooks. His grandfather's words filled the pages. Detailed observations. Dates and times when Silver Creek crews were spotted on neighboring properties. Patterns of dead wildlife. Chemical readings from water tests. The last entry was dated 3 days before his grandfather died. "They know I've been documenting. Pritchard came to the house today with the sheriff. Made it clear I had 2 choices. Sell or disappear. I told them I'd think about it. Bought myself a few days. James, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. They won't let me live long enough to go public. But they don't know about this place. They don't know I've been copying everything and hiding it here since the beginning. The water under this land is worth billions. Not just because it's pure, but because it feeds into 3 county water systems. If they control it, they control everything downstream. They can set prices, control access, turn water into the kind of commodity that makes men rich and communities desperate. Don't let them win. Take this evidence to someone who can't be bought. Someone outside the county. Outside the state if you have to. And James, I'm proud of you. Always have been. Even when you were angry and running from everything, I knew you'd come back when it mattered. You're stronger than you think. Stronger than what the war did to you. Trust your dog. Trust yourself. And trust that sometimes the fight finds us whether we're ready or not. Love, Grandpa. James had to stop reading. His vision blurred, and his chest felt too tight to breathe. He felt Sarah's hand on his shoulder. Light. Understanding. Take a minute, she said quietly. Atlas pressed against his leg, grounding him the way he always did when the world tilted too far. James wiped his eyes and forced himself to focus. We need to get all of this out. Every file. Every notebook. Everything. I'll start cataloging, Sarah said, already pulling out her camera. We photograph everything in place first. Chain of evidence. Then we remove it. They worked quickly but methodically. Sarah photographed every shelf, every document, every page in every notebook. James carefully packed everything into waterproof bags they found stacked in the corner, clearly prepared by his grandfather for exactly this purpose. An hour passed, then another. The bags piled up near the entrance, each one sealed and labeled. Atlas suddenly lifted his head. His ears swiveled toward the cave entrance, and a growl rumbled deep in his chest. James froze. How many? Atlas's growl deepened. Multiple targets. Out, James said quietly. Back in trance. Now. There is no back in trance, Sarah replied. Then we make a stand here. Choke point. They have to come through single file. Sarah pulled her pistol. How many do you think? Before James could answer, a voice echoed from outside the cave. Mr. Carter. We know you're in there. We know what you found. But here's the thing. That evidence doesn't matter if it never leaves this mountain. Pritchard. The same voice from last night. We can do this easy or hard. Pritchard continued. Easy means you walk out, leave everything behind, and we have a conversation about a very generous offer. Hard means this cave becomes your tomb, and no one ever finds you or that evidence. James looked at Sarah. She looked back at him, jaw set, ready. There's 3 of them. Another voice called out. Different man. We've got all day. You don't. No food. No water. And it's going to get real cold tonight. James moved to the cave entrance and peered out carefully. He could see 2 men positioned on either side of the opening. Both armed. Both comfortable with their weapons. Not security guards. Something worse. A 3rd man stood farther back. Pritchard. Expensive jacket. Clean boots. Watching like this was just another business transaction. You've got 30 seconds to decide, Pritchard called. Then we start encouraging you. James pulled back and looked at the evidence stacked around them. Years of his grandfather's work. Proof of corruption. Murder. Environmental crimes. Everything needed to bring these people down. He couldn't let it end here. Atlas, he said quietly. Scout. The dog immediately moved to the cave entrance, low and silent. His training from Afghanistan coming back like muscle memory. He could move through terrain without being seen. Could mark targets. Could create distraction when needed. What's the play? Sarah whispered. James thought fast. They're expecting us to either surrender or hole up. We do neither. We break through, split up, and get this evidence to multiple locations. They can't stop all of us. That's a terrible plan, Sarah said. You got a better one? No. Then it's what we've got. I'll take the primary assault. Draw their attention. You take the evidence and run downstream. Fast and low. There's a Forest Service road about 2 miles south. Get to it, and don't stop until you're in cell range. Call the state police. FBI. Anyone who isn't local. What about you? I'll be right behind you. Sarah looked at him, and James could see she knew he was lying. He wasn't planning to run. He was planning to make sure she got away. 10 seconds, Pritchard called. James took 3 of the waterproof bags and handed them to Sarah. Go, the second shooting starts. Don't look back. James. Go. He turned to Atlas. Ready? The dog's eyes locked on his, and James saw the same fierce loyalty that had saved his life in a desert halfway around the world. They'd survived worse than this. They'd survived when surviving seemed impossible. Time's up, Pritchard said. And then the cave entrance exploded with gunfire. The first burst of automatic fire tore chunks from the rock wall above the entrance, showering them with stone fragments. James threw himself flat, covering his head as rounds screamed past and ricocheted deeper into the cave. Atlas snarled, body coiled to spring, but James grabbed his collar. Not yet. Wait. The shooting stopped. Silence rushed back in, heavy with gun smoke and stone dust. James's ears rang. Beside him, Sarah had flattened against the cave wall, pistol up, controlled breathing. Good. She knew how to handle herself under fire. That was a warning, Pritchard shouted. Next burst comes lower. Now are we going to be reasonable? James didn't answer. He was calculating angles, distances, odds. 3 armed men. 1 entrance. No cover once they left the cave. A kill box by any tactical measure. But the men outside had made a mistake. They were positioned for a siege, not an assault. They'd expected fear to do the work for them. Sarah, James whispered. Count of 3. You move. Fast and low. Angle left toward that fallen pine. You see it. She nodded, face pale but focused. When you move, they'll track you. That's when Atlas and I make our play. He pulled the rifle off his shoulder and checked the magazine. 3 rounds. Not enough for a firefight, but enough for what he needed. This is insane, Sarah breathed. Yeah, but it's the only play we've got. He turned to Atlas and pointed toward the entrance. The dog tensed, every muscle ready. 1. James counted softly. Outside, he heard movement. Someone repositioning. Getting impatient. 2. Atlas's lips pulled back from his teeth. Not aggressive. Focused. The way he looked before hitting a target in a combat zone. 3. Sarah exploded from the cave entrance, running low and fast. Exactly as trained. The men outside shouted, weapons tracking her movement. Now, James commanded. Atlas launched through the entrance like a missile. 80 pounds of trained aggression moving faster than the men could react. He hit the first gunman in the chest, driving him backward into the creek with a massive splash. The man's weapon flew from his hands, clattering across stones. James was right behind, rifle up, moving with the combat instincts that had kept him alive through 3 deployments. He didn't think, didn't hesitate, just moved. The second gunman swung his weapon toward James. Too slow. James fired once, hitting the man's shoulder. Not a kill shot. Didn't need to be. The man went down, screaming, weapon falling. Pritchard scrambled backward, pulling a pistol from inside his jacket. But he wasn't a shooter. James could tell by the way he held it. All threat, no skill. Don't, James said, rifle steady on center mass. Pritchard froze. In the creek, Atlas had the first gunman pinned, teeth inches from his throat. The man had gone completely still, hands up, eyes wide with terror. Call them off, James ordered. You just assaulted. James's rifle didn't waver. Call them off. Pritchard's voice cracked. Stand down. Everyone stand down. The wounded man on the ground stopped moving for his weapon. The man in the creek stayed frozen under Atlas's weight. Sarah emerged from behind the fallen pine, her own weapon up and steady. Clear, she called. James kept his rifle on Pritchard. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk away. All of you. And you're going to forget you ever came here. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Pritchard said, trying to recover some authority. This is bigger than you. Bigger than your grandfather. You can't win. Maybe not. But I can make you lose. Something changed in Pritchard's eyes. Calculation. Like he was weighing options, running scenarios. The evidence, he said slowly. It's all in that cave. You can't carry it all. Can't protect it. All we have to do is wait you out. James smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. You think my grandfather only made 1 copy? You think he trusted everything to 1 location? Pritchard's face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? You want to bet your entire operation on that? Silence stretched between them. The only sound was the creek running and the wounded man's labored breathing. Sarah spoke up. While we've been talking, everything from that cave has been uploading to 3 separate servers. Cloud backup. Encrypted. Automated release if we don't check in every 6 hours. It was a bluff. James could tell by the slight tremor in her voice. But Pritchard couldn't, or didn't want to risk it. What do you want? Pritchard asked finally. I want you gone. Off this property. Out of this county. And I want you to take your operation with you. That's not going to happen. There's too much money involved. Too many people invested. James's finger moved closer to the trigger. Then I guess we see how this plays out. For a long moment, no one moved. The mountain held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then Pritchard lowered his weapon. Slowly, carefully. This isn't over, he said. No, James agreed. It's not. But the next time you come, bring lawyers. Because everything you've done is about to become very public. Pritchard backed away toward the logging road where their truck was parked. The wounded man staggered after him, clutching his shoulder. The man in the creek remained frozen until James whistled softly. Atlas, release. The dog stepped back, but kept his eyes locked on the target, ready to re-engage at the slightest provocation. The man scrambled out of the creek and ran, water streaming from his clothes. They watched the truck leave, engine growling as it disappeared through the trees. Only then did James lower his rifle. His hands shook, adrenaline crash hitting hard and sudden. His knees nearly buckled. Sarah caught his arm, steadying him. "You good?" "No, but I'm standing." Atlas pressed against his leg, and James sank down, arms around the dog, face buried in wet fur. His heart hammered. His breath came too fast. The edges of his vision darkened. "Not here. Not now. Don't lose it now." Sarah's voice came from far away. "James, stay with me. Count backward from 10. He couldn't remember why that mattered. But he tried. 10. His voice barely worked. "Good. Keep going." 9. Atlas licked his face, warm and steady. 8. 7. The darkness receded. His breathing slowed. 6. 5. The mountain came back into focus. The creek. The trees. Sarah kneeling beside him, hand on his shoulder. 4. 3. 2. He could breathe again. 1. Sarah squeezed his shoulder. "You're okay." "We're okay." James nodded, not trusting his voice. They sat there for several minutes, letting the adrenaline fade, letting the world settle. Finally, James stood. "We need to move the evidence," he said. "All of it. They'll be back with more people." "Agreed. But not to town. Anywhere local is compromised. There's a friend. From my unit. Lives about 3 hours north. He's got a place where we can secure everything while we figure out next steps." Sarah nodded. "Let's do it." They returned to the cave and began hauling everything out. It took 6 trips to get all the bags to Sarah's Jeep. They worked fast, constantly scanning the surrounding forest for signs of surveillance. When the last bag was loaded, James took one final look at the cave entrance. His grandfather had spent years protecting this place, documenting crimes, gathering evidence. All while watching his back, knowing any day could be his last. "I'll finish it," James promised the empty cave. "I'll make sure they pay." They drove out using back roads Sarah had scouted, avoiding the main routes through town. Atlas rode in back, alert despite exhaustion, watching the road behind them. An hour into the drive, Sarah's phone buzzed. She checked it and went pale. "What?" James asked. "It's trending. Someone posted video from earlier. You and Atlas taking down those men. It's going viral." She turned the phone so James could see. Shaky footage, obviously shot from a distance with a telephoto lens, but clear enough to show everything. The confrontation, the shooting, Atlas's takedown. "Who recorded that?" James demanded. "No idea, but it's got 3 million views already. And the comments." She scrolled quickly. People are picking it apart, identifying Silver Creek development logos on the truck, recognizing Pritchard. "That's good, right? Public pressure?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe it just made you a target everyone can see." As if on cue, James's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered on speaker. "Mr. Carter?" A woman's voice. Professional. Clipped. "This is Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI. I need you to listen very carefully. Do not go home. Do not contact local law enforcement. Head to the nearest federal building and ask for me specifically. We've been investigating Silver Creek development for 18 months, and based on what we just saw online, you're now a material witness. Possibly the material witness." James looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "How do I know you're really FBI?" James asked. "You don't. Not until you walk into a federal building and verify my credentials. But Mr. Carter, the men you just went up against have connections to organized crime, political corruption, and environmental terrorism across 4 states. They've killed at least 6 people we know about. Your grandfather was one of them." James's chest tightened. "You knew about my grandfather?" "We suspected, but we couldn't prove it. Until now. If you have what I think you have, we can bring down the entire operation. But you need to get to safety first. Where are you?" James hesitated. Sarah was shaking her head, mouthing, "Don't tell her." "I'll call you back," James said and hung up. That could have been legitimate, Sarah said. Or it could have been them, buying time to set up another ambush. Which is why we're not going to any federal building. Not yet. Not until we've secured the evidence somewhere they can't touch it. They drove for another 2 hours, taking random turns, doubling back, making sure no one followed. Finally, they pulled onto a dirt road that led to a compound of small cabins nestled against a ridge. A man stepped out of the largest cabin as they approached. Mid-40s, built like a brick wall, with a beard that had gone gray and eyes that missed nothing. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, but James recognized the posture. Military. Probably special forces based on the way he moved. Carter, the man said, face breaking into a grin. Damn, it's good to see you. You too, Reeves. James climbed out, and they clasped hands. Thanks for this. You know I've always got your six. Who's your friend? Sarah Mitchell, journalist. And that's Atlas. Reeves looked at the dog and whistled low. Hell of an animal. He the one from that video. You saw it. Everyone's seen it. You've got yourself a situation, brother. Yeah, that's why I'm here. They unloaded the evidence into one of the smaller cabins. Reeves had security cameras, motion sensors, and according to Sarah's impressed examination, a surprisingly sophisticated digital setup for someone living off-grid. Marine Corps taught me a lot of things, Reeves said, including how to disappear when necessary and how to make sure uninvited guests get a warm welcome. While Sarah began cataloging the evidence, James sat on the porch with Reeves and Atlas, watching the sun sink toward the western ridge. You know they're going to come after you, Reeves said quietly. People like that don't just walk away. I know. So what's the play? James was quiet for a moment. My grandfather spent years fighting this alone. Died for it. I'm not letting that be for nothing. Noble. Also stupid. You can't win a war by yourself. I'm not by myself. James gestured toward the cabin where Sarah worked. And I've got you. And Atlas. Reeves smiled. Fair enough. So we do this smart. We get the evidence verified by people who can't be bought. We make copies and spread them everywhere. We make it too big to bury. That's the plan. And when they send professionals after you, because they will. James looked at Atlas. The dog looked back, steady and sure. Then we handle it. Same as always. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the mountains. Inside, Sarah worked with focused intensity, organizing years of documentation into something that could dismantle an empire. James's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We know where you are. We know who you're with. Last chance to make this go away quietly. Check your grandfather's grave. You'll find a very generous offer waiting. James showed it to Reeves. That's bold, Reeves said. Threatening you while admitting they tampered with a grave. Or it's bait. Get me to go somewhere specific, isolated, finish what they started. Probably. But what if there really is something there? James hadn't been to his grandfather's grave. Hadn't been able to face it. The funeral had happened while he was still figuring out how to get across the country, and by the time he arrived, the service was over and his grandfather was already in the ground. Could be important, Reeves said. Could be the last piece of the puzzle. Or it's a trap. Only one way to find out. James looked at his friend. You're actually suggesting we walk into an obvious trap? Reeves shrugged. I'm suggesting we walk into it prepared. With backup. With a plan. And with the understanding that sometimes the only way through is straight ahead. James considered it. Every tactical bone in his body said no. But his gut, the instinct that had kept him alive when logic failed, said there was something he needed to see. Tomorrow, he decided. Early. Before they're ready. I'll come with you. No. I need you here, protecting the evidence. If this goes wrong, you make sure Sarah gets everything to the right people. James. That's the mission, Reeves. You know how this works. Reeves didn't like it, but he nodded. Then you take precautions. Body armor if you've got it. Multiple weapons. And for God's sake, take backup comms so we know if you're in trouble. They spent the next hour planning. Routes in and out. Rally points. Signals. All the old protocols from missions they'd run in places most people couldn't pronounce. When Sarah finally emerged from the cabin, exhausted but determined, she found them poring over topographic maps. What did I miss? She asked. We're going to visit my grandfather's grave, James said. That's the worst idea I've heard all day. And I've heard a lot of bad ideas today. Maybe. But it's also the only lead we've got on what they're really after. Sarah sat down and looked at the maps. Then I'm coming too. No. Not negotiable. You need documentation. Photos. Witnesses. And you need someone who isn't emotionally invested enough to walk into an obvious setup. James wanted to argue. But she was right. And more importantly, he was tired of doing everything alone. Fine. But same rules as before. You do what I say when I say it. Deal. They tried to sleep, but James lay awake on a bunk in one of the spare cabins, staring at the ceiling, listening to Atlas's breathing beside him. Somewhere out there, people were planning how to end this. how to silence him the way they'd silenced his grandfather. But they'd made one critical mistake. They thought he was alone. They thought he was broken. They thought a veteran with PTSD and a scarred dog would be easy to eliminate. They had no idea what they were actually dealing with. Just before dawn, James rose and prepared. He checked his weapons, secured his gear, and made sure Atlas was ready. The dog watched him with those knowing eyes, understanding without words that today would be different. Today they were hunting. Sarah joined them as the sky began to lighten, and together they loaded into her Jeep. Reeves stood on the porch, watching them go, one hand raised in a silent salute. The cemetery sat on a hillside overlooking the valley, surrounded by old oaks that had stood witness to generations of grief. Morning fog clung to the ground, making the headstones look like they were floating in a gray sea. James parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, moving through the fog with Atlas at his side. Sarah followed, camera ready, documenting everything. They found his grandfather's grave in the family plot. Fresh flowers lay against the headstone. Recent, within the last day, and beneath the flowers was an envelope. James crouched, scanning the surrounding area. No sign of surveillance. No movement. Just the quiet of the dead and the whisper of wind through oak leaves. He picked up the envelope. Heavy, expensive paper. Inside was a cashier's check made out to him for $5 million. And a note in Pritchard's handwriting. This is more money than you'll ever see again. Take it. Leave. Forget everything you found. Everyone wins. Or don't. And we'll make sure your grandfather has company in this cemetery very soon. Your choice. James read it twice, then handed it to Sarah. She photographed it, the check, the flowers, everything. What are you going to do? She asked quietly. James pulled out a lighter and held the check over the flame. He watched it catch, curl, burn. The ashes scattered in the wind. I'm going to finish what he started. Atlas barked once. Sharp. Warning. James spun around, hand going to his weapon. But no one was there. Just fog and stone and the weight of promises kept and broken. They walked back to the Jeep, and James didn't look back. His grandfather's grave would keep its silence a while longer. But soon, very soon, the whole truth would speak loud enough for everyone to hear. The drive back to Reeves's compound felt longer than it should have. James kept checking the mirrors, watching for tails, seeing threats in every vehicle that stayed behind them too long. Sarah noticed his tension but didn't comment. She'd been in enough hostile situations to recognize when someone was running on adrenaline and instinct rather than sleep and food. Atlas sat in the back seat, head up, scanning through the windows with the same vigilance James showed. They were a matched set, both carrying the weight of training that saved lives and scars that never quite healed. When they finally pulled onto Reeves's property, James felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. Motion sensors would alert them to any approach. Security cameras covered every angle. And Reeves himself stood on the porch with a rifle cradled in his arms, relaxed but ready. How'd it go? Reeves called as they climbed out. They tried to buy me off, James said. $5 million. Reeves whistled low. That's a lot of money to turn down. It's a lot of money to admit guilt with. Inside, Sarah spread the photographs from the cemetery across the table next to the evidence they'd already organized. The full picture was starting to emerge. Years of systematic contamination. Dozens of properties acquired under duress. Officials bribed. Witnesses silenced. This is bigger than I thought, Sarah said, studying the timeline she'd constructed. Silver Creek isn't just a development company. They're part of a network. Look at the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the political donations. This goes all the way up. James leaned over the table. How far up? State senators, EPA officials, even a federal judge. Then who can we trust? That's the problem. Sarah pulled out her laptop and opened an encrypted messaging app. But I know someone. Former colleague who went to work for the Department of Justice. Specialized in environmental crimes and public corruption. If anyone can handle something this big, it's her. She typed quickly, attaching encrypted files, photos, documents. Minutes passed. Then her phone rang. That was fast, Sarah said, answering on speaker. Hey, Karen. What the hell did you just send me? The voice on the other end sounded excited and terrified in equal measure. Please tell me this is verified. Every document. Every photo. And there's more. Hours of video documentation. Where are you? Somewhere safe. With the primary witness. Keep him that way. What you've sent me, if even half of it's accurate, We're talking about a federal task force. RICO charges. This could take down an entire network. James spoke up. How long? Who's that? Karen asked. James Carter. It's my grandfather's evidence. A pause. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry for your loss. But if you're willing to testify, to go on record with everything you've found, we can move fast. Days, not weeks. What about protection? Full witness protection if necessary. Safe houses. Marshals. Whatever you need. James looked at Atlas. The dog looked back, steady as always. Then James looked at Sarah and Reeves. The people who'd stood with him when they didn't have to. I don't want protection, James said. I want justice. One usually requires the other, Karen replied gently. These people have already killed your grandfather. They've proven they'll use violence. You need to take this seriously. I am taking it seriously. That's why I'm not hiding. Sarah touched his arm. James, she's right. If you're dead, none of this matters. And if I run and hide, they win anyway. They'll find another way to bury this. They've done it before. Reeves cleared his throat. What if there's a middle path? We don't hide, but we go public. Make James too visible to touch quietly. Karen's voice sharpened with interest. What are you thinking? Press conference, Reeves said. National media. Put the whole story out there before they can spin it. Once it's public, killing James becomes too obvious. Too risky. That's dangerous, Karen said. Going public before we've secured indictments means they'll have time to destroy evidence, flee jurisdiction, or worse. They're already destroying evidence, Sarah countered. And they already know we have copies. The question is whether we move first or wait for them to make another play. Silence on the line. Then Karen spoke carefully. If you're going to do this, do it smart. I need 24 hours. Maybe 48. Let me get the right people in place. Federal prosecutors who can't be bought. Agents I trust personally. Then we coordinate the public release with sealed indictments. We hit them from every direction at once. James considered it. 2 days. 2 days to prepare, to make sure every piece of evidence was secured and backed up in multiple locations. 2 days for them to make another move. 48 hours, he agreed. Then we go public with everything. I'll be in touch, Karen said. And Mr. Carter? Watch your back. The next 48 hours are when they'll be most desperate. The call ended, leaving them in heavy silence. So now we wait, Sarah said. No, James replied. Now we make sure they can't catch us unprepared. They spent the next hours turning Reeves's compound into something approaching a fortress. Additional motion sensors around the perimeter. Cameras with redundant power supplies. Clear fields of fire from defensive positions. It wasn't military grade, but it would do. As darkness fell, Reeves started a fire in a barrel outside, and they gathered around it, exhaustion finally catching up with all of them. Atlas lay at James's feet, dozing but still alert enough that his ears tracked every sound. Can I ask you something? Sarah said after a while. James nodded. Why'd you really come back? I mean, you could have just signed the deed over to someone. Sold at sight unseen. Why walk into all this? James was quiet for a long moment, watching flames dance. I didn't have anywhere else to go. There's always somewhere else. Not for me. Not anymore. The Marines kicked me out with a medical discharge. PTSD, they said. Like they were doing me a favor. My ex-wife took everything that mattered. My friends from before, they don't know how to talk to me now. I'm too different. Too broken. You're not broken, Sarah said quietly. Yeah? Then why can't I sleep without seeing their faces? Why does every loud noise put me back in a firefight? Why does Atlas have to pull me back from the edge 3 times a week? Atlas lifted his head at his name, and James ran a hand over the dog's scarred face. This place, James continued. It was the last place I remember feeling like I belonged somewhere. Before everything went wrong. Before the war, before all of it. My grandfather, he never looked at me like I was damaged. Even when I was angry and stupid and running from everything. He just let me be. He sounds like a good man, Reeves said. He was. And they killed him for trying to do the right thing. So yeah, I came back because I had nowhere else to go. But I'm staying because he deserves better than being another casualty that gets forgotten. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. Tomorrow we start making calls. Every news outlet I know. Every journalist who owes me a favor. By the time we're done, this story will be too big to bury. Good, James said. They sat in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called. The mountains held their secrets a little while longer, but not much longer. James's phone buzzed. Another unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him. Yeah. Mr. Carter. An older man's voice. Gravelly. Tired. You don't know me, but I knew your grandfather. Served with him in Korea. My name's Walter Pierce. James sat up straighter. What do you want? To tell you to be careful. The people you're up against, they've got connections you can't imagine. Your grandfather found that out the hard way. Were you with him when he died? No, but I was with him a week before. He knew they were coming for him. He'd made peace with it. Said he'd done what needed doing, and the rest was up to you. James's throat tightened. He knew I'd come back. He hoped you would. Said you were stronger than you gave yourself credit for. Said the war hadn't broken you, just bent you for a while. And that when you straightened back out, you'd be something fierce. Why are you telling me this? Because he asked me to. If anything happened to him, I was supposed to find you. Make sure you knew he was proud of you. Make sure you knew that whatever you found, whatever you decided to do with it, he trusted your judgment. James had to look away from the fire, blinking hard. There's one more thing, Walter continued. Your grandfather made a second cache. Insurance, he called it. In case the first one was compromised. It's in a safe deposit box at Mountain Trust Bank in Asheville. Box number 447. He's buried under the oak tree behind his house. 3 feet east of the trunk, 2 feet down. How do you know all this? Because I helped him set it up. And because he knew that if they got to him, they'd be watching anyone connected to him. But a random old veteran calling a number 2 weeks after the funeral? That might slip through. Thank you, James managed. Don't thank me. Just finish what he started. And Mr. Carter? He loved you. In case no one ever told you that directly. The line went dead. James sat there, staring at his phone, emotions churning too fast to process. Reeves and Sarah were watching him. Good news or bad? Reeves asked. Both. Maybe neither. I don't know. James stood. But we're going back to my grandfather's house. Tonight. There's something else we need to find. They loaded into Sarah's Jeep, leaving Reeves to watch the compound. The drive took 2 hours, and they approached the property cautiously, scanning for signs of surveillance or ambush. The house stood dark and silent, exactly as James had left it. They entered carefully, Atlas clearing each room before giving the all-clear. Then James led them to the backyard where a massive oak tree stood sentinel. 3 feet east, 2 feet down, he murmured. They dug by flashlight, careful and methodical. 15 minutes later, the shovel hit something solid. A small waterproof container. Inside was a key and another note in his grandfather's handwriting. James, if Walter gave you this, it means I'm gone. The box in Asheville contains the original documents. Everything in the cave was copies. Good copies, admissible in court, but copies nonetheless. The originals are what will seal the case beyond any doubt. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to help you through this. Sorry I left you with such a burden. But I know you, son. You're stronger than you think. You've survived worse than small-town corruption and corporate greed. You've survived war. You've survived loss. And you've survived yourself, which is the hardest battle of all. Trust Atlas. Trust yourself. And know that whatever happens, you've already made me proud just by coming back. Love always, Grandpa. James folded the note carefully and tucked it in his pocket along with the key. Tomorrow they'd drive to Asheville. Tomorrow they'd get the originals. Tomorrow they'd have everything they needed. But tonight, standing in his grandfather's backyard under stars that had watched over these mountains for millennia, James finally let himself grieve. For the grandfather he'd lost. For the years he'd wasted being angry. For all the conversations they'd never have. Sarah and Atlas stood quietly beside him, giving him space but staying close enough that he knew he wasn't alone. After a while, James wiped his eyes and straightened his shoulders. Okay, he said. Let's finish this. They drove through the night, reaching Asheville as the sun rose. Mountain Trust Bank wouldn't open for another 2 hours, so they found a diner and forced themselves to eat. James pushed eggs around his plate while Sarah made phone calls, lining up press contacts, preparing for the storm they were about to unleash. Atlas sat beside their booth, accepting bits of bacon from Sarah and watching the door with patient vigilance. When the bank finally opened, they were first in line. James presented the key and his ID, and after some verification, they were led to a private viewing room. The safe deposit box was larger than James expected. Heavy. Inside were file folders organized with meticulous care. Original documents dating back 15 years. Water tests showing progressive contamination. Financial records proving payoffs. And sworn affidavits from people who'd witnessed crimes but were too afraid to speak publicly. At the bottom of the box was a USB drive and a note for the FBI. Give them this directly. Don't let it out of your sight. Sarah photographed everything while James secured the originals in a document bag. They were walking out of the bank when his phone rang. Karen from the DOJ. We're ready, she said without preamble. Federal building in Charleston. 3 hours. We'll have a full team waiting. We're in Asheville. We'll need 4 hours. Then drive fast. And Mr. Carter? We just got word that Silver Creek Development CEO is scheduled to fly out of the country tonight. If we don't move now, we lose him. James looked at Sarah. She nodded. We'll be there, James said. They ran for the Jeep. The drive to Charleston should have taken 4 hours. Sarah made it in 3.5, pushing the Jeep hard while James rode shotgun with one hand on his weapon and the other on the document bag. Atlas stayed alert in back, sensing the urgency. They pulled up to the federal building at 2:47 p.m. Karen was waiting outside with 4 federal agents, all wearing expressions that mixed professional calm with barely contained excitement. Mr. Carter, Karen said, extending her hand. Let's move inside. We've got a lot to go over. The next 6 hours passed in a blur. Conference rooms. Sworn statements. Document verification. More agents joining as the scope of the case became clear. Prosecutors reviewing evidence. Tech specialists creating backups of backups. Karen pulled James aside around 9 p.m. We have enough. More than enough. We're executing arrest warrants at midnight. Federal and state charges. Simultaneous raids in 4 states. By morning, this whole network comes down. Pritchard, James asked. Top of the list. Along with the Silver Creek CEO, 3 county commissioners, the sheriff, and about 40 others. James felt something unodd in his chest. It's really over? The investigation is just beginning. But the immediate threat to you? Yes, it's over. They can't touch you now without exposing themselves further. Sarah found him in the hallway afterward, and they stood together in exhausted silence. Your grandfather would be proud, she said. He should be here to see it. He is. In everything you did. Every choice you made. He's here. At midnight, while James dozed in an uncomfortable chair with Atlas at his feet, federal agents executed 43 arrest warrants across 4 states. By dawn, every major player in the Silver Creek network was in custody. By noon, it was the lead story on every news network. Karen drove James and Sarah back to the mountains 3 days later. The press conference had happened. The story had exploded. James had given his testimony, and now it was in the hands of prosecutors and juries. They pulled up to his grandfather's house, and James stood looking at it for a long moment. What now? Karen asked. Now I figure out how to live here. How to make this place what my grandfather wanted it to be, which was home. Over the following weeks, James settled into a rhythm. He repaired the house, working with his hands in a way that felt healing. He explored the property, learning its boundaries and secrets. He discovered the spring his grandfather had protected, understanding now why it mattered so much. Sarah visited often, working on follow-up stories, watching the trials unfold. Reeves came down to help with renovations, and slowly, carefully, James began to believe he might actually have a future here. Atlas aged gracefully beside him, the gray in his muzzle spreading but his eyes staying sharp. They took long walks through the forest, past the cave where everything changed, along the creek that had been worth dying for. One evening, James sat on the repaired porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. He'd received word that day that Pritchard and the others had been convicted. 20-year sentences. The water would stay protected. The land would stay free. Atlas lay beside him, head resting on his paws, content. We did it, boy, James said quietly. We finished what he started. The dog's tail thumped once against the porch boards. James pulled out his grandfather's letter and read it one more time. Trust Atlas. Trust yourself. And know that whatever happens, you've already made me proud just by coming back. He'd come back broken, expecting nothing but a roof to keep the rain off. Instead, he'd found purpose. He'd found a fight worth fighting. He'd found, against all odds, a way forward. The mountains held him the way they'd held his grandfather. The water ran clean and pure. And for the first time in years, James Carter slept through the night without nightmares. Atlas breathing steadily beside him, both of them finally home. If this story moved you, if you believe loyalty can save a life and a place can heal a soul, type 1 in the comments. If you made it to the end with James and Atlas, type 0. Your comment helps this story reach someone who needs it tonight. And if you want more stories of veterans and the dogs who stand beside them through every battle, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.